Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we are going to analyze the Hindu dated 21st of February 2020. Displayed on the screen is a list of articles that we are going to discuss today. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description of the video. Let's begin our analysis. We have taken this article from page number 10 and it talks about the recent epidemic that the world has seen. It talks about gearing up to fight the next big viral outbreak. Now, as far as this topic is concerned, this is important more from the perspective of General Studies Paper 3, and here it is important from the perspective of disaster management. Here, the author quotes that according to Global Health Security Index, most of the world is not ready to handle any kind of epidemic as we have seen in the recent past, and hence it suggests measures that are required to manage this kind of a disaster, which is more of a health disaster. At the same time, this article is also important from the perspective of General Studies Paper 2, where it will be part of social justice. As a subtopic, it will come under issues relating to development and management of social sector, services relating to health, education, and human resources. Now, in this context, let's first understand what author has highlighted in this article. Now, author has taken the example of the coronavirus disease that was there in the China and then later spread to many other countries. At the same time, the author highlights that India's preparedness to combat such kind of global emergency is far from satisfactory. Now, as already mentioned, the author has highlighted Global Health Security Index, which he has used in terms of identifying where we lack in terms of preparedness and what we can do in terms of preventing another global outbreak or emergency. Now, before moving further, let's first understand what is Global Health Security Index. Now, when we talk about Global Health Security Index, it is the first comprehensive assessment and benchmarking of health security and related capabilities across 195 countries that make up the states parties to the International Health Regulation. Now, when we talk about international health regulation, this comes under the ambit of WHO and it became operational in the year 2007. Now, when we talk about this index, that is Global Health Security Index or GHS Index, it is a project of Nuclear Threat Initiative and the John Hopkins Center for Health Security. And it is developed by the Economist Intelligence Unit or EIU. Now, in this context, let's first understand what is the need of such Global Health Security Index in terms of preventing such types of crises. Now, globally, world has seen many kind of epidemic in the recent past, which includes epidemic of SARS, avian flu, and Ebola, etc. Now, in this context, it is likely that world will continue to face outbreaks that most countries are ill positioned to combat. Apart from that, there are other factors which are important as well. In this context, climate change and urbanization play a very important role. Apart from that, as the world has become much smaller place, there is international mass displacement and migration as well. In such a case, this creates an ideal condition for the emergence and spread of pathogens which are very difficult to control in the current scheme of things. There is another threat which is highlighted in this Global Health Security Index is that many countries face an increased potential threat of accidental or deliberate release, which also relates to terrorism as well. And some have also named as bioterrorism. In such a case, a deadly engineered pathogen which could cause even greater harm than a naturally occurring pandemic. Now, when we talk about the deliberate release of deadly engineered pathogens, it is important here to highlight that different countries have different types of capacities to handle this kind of a biological threat. And hence, disparity in the capacity and inattention to biological threat among some leaders have exacerbated the preparedness gap. Now, when we talk about the Global Health Security Index, it basically classifies the information into six categories. These six categories are prevent, detect, respond, health, norm, and risk. Now, when we talk about the prevention, The prevention is basically prevention of the emergence or release of pathogens. When we talk about detection reporting, early detection and reporting is very important to fight any kind of global emergency. So early detection and reporting of epidemic is the second parameter. Now after reporting and detection, what is required is rapid response to any kind of situation which can be controlled, and hence quarantining and other measures are important. So rapid response to and mitigation of the spread of an epidemic. Now, in the context of the coronavirus disease of 2019, it is said that rapid response was missing in China, and hence the problem became too difficult to manage in that context. Health system, in which sufficient and robust health system to treat the sick and protect the health workers is very important aspect. Compliance with international norms are required in order to develop national capacity, financing plan to address gaps, and adhering to global norms. At the same time, the sixth parameter is risk environment. Now, when we talk about any kind of global outbreak of such kind of emergency, overall risk environment and countries' vulnerability to biological threat is also being equated in this context. Now, when we talk about this global health security index, for reference, US is number 1 and China is 51. And India's rank in this entire global health security index is 57. Now, author uses this global health security index to identify the key gaps in India's system in terms of preparedness for any kind of viral outbreak which may lead to disease or any kind of epidemic. Now, let's go to the ideas that author has shared in terms of 4-point health agenda. Now, when we talk about Global Health Security Index, author has highlighted the 4-point health agenda for developing countries like India. These 4-point health agenda can help in better managing their health services and stop any kind of epidemic to blow out of proportion. Now, in this case, the author highlights that there are 4 important aspects. First is the early detection and prevention. Second is better collaboration across health service providers. Third is more investment in health service outcome and education. And fourth is the better care and environment and biodiversity. Now, in this case, let's try to understand first two, that is early detection and prevention, and better collaboration through an example. Now, the author highlights the case of Thailand, which has a distinction of being the highest ranked in terms of Asian country in the Global Health Security Index. Thailand is ranked at 6th, and author highlights that what Thailand has done in 2015 can be a manifestation of why the rank is so high. In 2015, the cases of MERS, that is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, was detected in Thailand. The moment it was detected, Thailand government immediately reached out to WHO in a quick and clear communication. So early detection and better collaboration across health service providers helped in better prevention of this disease. Now, if we relate the same kind of a thing with the Chinese experience in terms of coronavirus disease, China has not only downplayed the extent of disease, at the same time, in the initial stage, they did not accept presence of new type of coronavirus for which there is no treatment available. So from this example, the author highlights that why Thailand is ranked at 6th and why China is ranked at 51. It is very important that we detect the disease and then make the prevention possible. Apart from that, there is a need of better collaboration across various health service providers. Now, we are living in a globalized world in which migration and immigration is going on, and hence those agencies which perform at global level should be informed as well. They can help in controlling the spread of the disease, and hence the author has highlighted this aspect. Now, author has also taken the case of India to highlight a very important aspect, that more investment in health system outcomes and education is required. For this particular purpose, author has highlighted that there was an occurrence of H1N1 influenza in some of the states of India like Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Odisha and other states in 2009. Now, in these states, there was no early detection and there was not much of a collaboration available, and hence the impact of influenza, that is H1N1 influenza, was much more than it was expected. At the same time, if we talk about the recent cases of Nipah In the state of Kerala, the author highlights that the availability of equipment for quick diagnosis, measures to prevent disease from spreading, and public information campaign all helped in keeping the mortality rate from Nipah virus relatively low. So author has clearly highlighted the kind of irony that we have seen in terms of the H1N1 epidemic in 2009 and about the Nipah virus that we have seen in the recent past in Kerala. Both show that more investment in health system outcomes and education are important. As you must be knowing already that the investment of Kerala government in health system outcome is one of the best in India. Another very important issue that has emerged in the recent past in terms of environment and biodiversity. Now, when we talk about the environment, as environment is degrading with each passing day, the impact of various kind of disease like another challenge that we have seen in the recent past is the challenge of degradation of environment and biodiversity. So the author has clearly highlighted that there is a need of better care for the environment. Now, when you talk about any kind of respiratory syndrome like SARS, avian flu, or even coronavirus disease, the impact of degrading environment has multiplied the effect of these diseases. Apart from this, the author also highlights that there is a biodiversity link as well. Now, when we talk about the kind of pathogens that we have seen in the recent past, the recent outbreak in China, which related to the coronavirus, have believed to emanated in a market where wild animals were sold. The author also quotes that nearly two-thirds of known pathogens and three-fourths of emerging pathogens are communicated from animals to humans. And hence, there is a need to conserve biodiversity as well. Otherwise, the impact of these pathogens will increase dramatically. So, this brings us to the very important question. So, what can we do to enhance our level of preparedness for these kind of epidemic? The first and foremost thing that the author highlights is checking the effectiveness of the system regularly. The author highlights that each state in India should actually identify the critical gaps in areas such as adequacy and supply of diagnostic equipment, health facilities, hygiene practices, and prevention and treatment protocol. If we do this regularly, then our level of preparedness will be at par with what is expected according to WHO norms. Apart from that, there is an emergent need of increasing partnership and collaboration in the same field. Now, when we talk about partnership, it implies partnership between private and public sector and between countries. These kind of partnership can sustain supply chain and bolster medical capacity of countries struggling to cope. And hence, partnership and collaboration is a very important aspect that would enhance our level of preparedness. As clearly highlighted in terms of managing the crisis that we have seen in the Nipah virus in Kerala, investment in education and health is a very important aspect that author has highlighted in terms of enhancing our level of preparedness. Apart from that, author has clearly highlighted that there is a need to maintain environment and prevent environmental degradation. At the same time, conserving biodiversity is a very important aspect that the author has highlighted in detail. And hence, if we talk about the level of preparedness, then there are five major things that we need to take care of. First and foremost, checking the effectiveness of system regularly, partnership and collaboration, invest in education and health, prevent environmental degradation, and conserve biodiversity. If we follow these five things in detail, then we can definitely enable our systems to fight these kind of global epidemics much better. So when we talk about these 4-point health agenda that author has highlighted, these are interrelated to what we should do in terms of enhancing our level of preparedness. Now with this, let's take up a mains-based question that you can answer after going through this discussion. The mains-based question that we can take up after this discussion is, in the light of recent global epidemics like coronavirus disease, what measures can you suggest to enhance the level of preparedness for such kind of global epidemic? You are expected to answer this question in 150 words. Now let's move to the next news analysis. Page number 7 of today's newspaper presents an article which talks about vacant special economic zone land to be used for affordable housing. Now, as far as this news is concerned, this is important more from the perspective of General Studies Paper 3 and will come under the topic of economic development. Now, it is important here to know that in India, we have around 355 notified special economic zones. Out of these 355, around 200 are operational. It means that around 155 special economic zones are lying vacant or are unused. In this context, the author has highlighted that vacant SEZ land can be used for affordable housing. It can also be interpreted that the special economic zones policy which India has implemented has not bore the desired fruits. And in this context, this article is important for us to know what is special economic zones, what is the legal background, how this becomes easier to set up special economic zones, and what are the kind of challenges that we have seen in the recent past. In this context, let's try to understand the definition of special economic zone. Now, when we talk about special economic zones, these are specifically delineated duty free enclaves and deemed to be foreign territories for the purpose of trade, operations, and duties and tariffs. In this context, let's use an example to understand this thing in full detail. Now, let's assume that this blue rectangle is a country A and this red oval is SCZ of country A. Now, when we define any particular territory as special economic zone with a country, it means that any kind of inputs from country A to special economic zone would be considered as an export. At the same time, any kinds of good which are coming from special economic zone within the country A will be considered as import for country A. At the same time, it is important here to highlight that special economic zone is the territorial unit of country A only. But at the same time, this is considered to be a foreign territory for the perspective of inviting more investment into the area and for simplified operations in terms of setting up business and for running it. Now, in order to understand why special economic zones have been created, let's try to understand the contribution of various sectors in our GDP. Now, let's take example of agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Now, we know that in the current situation, services contribute most. They contribute around 55 to 56% of our GDP. At the same time, when we talk about agriculture, agriculture contributes around 14 to 15%. Now, there is one thing that we can observe here is that manufacturing sector in India has not developed much, and hence the employment potential or opportunity that this sector might offer has been taken off. And hence, this is not the kind of balanced development that we are looking forward. So, in order to actually improve the manufacturing sector, special economic zones were created. Now, here it is also important to understand that when we are designing special economic zone, we had two clear-cut objectives. First, to earn foreign currency, and second, to set up manufacturing base in India. Now, when we talk about these objectives are different from what Chinese government has done in terms of their special economic zone. When China was setting up special economic zone, of course, manufacturing base was definitely part of their strategy. At the same time, they focused on getting the latest technology in their territory. And this is how the special economic zone policy of India is different from the special economic zone policy of China as well. And this will have lasting impact in terms of the value generated by special economic zones in the economy of India. Now, before moving further, let's try to understand the legal aspect of these special economic zones. These special economic zones are created by Special Economic Zones Act of 2005, and this is supported by Special Economic Zones Rules of 2006. Now, this leads us to a very important question about the need to create special economic zone or to create a foreign territory in terms of trade and other policies within the country. Now, we know that India became independent in 1947. At the same time, the major economic overhaul in terms of policy took place in 1991. Even when India adopted the policy of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, the business and trade atmosphere within the country was not at par with the best in terms of promoting economic growth, trade, and business. In order to solve this problem, special economic zones were created, which are area in which business and trade laws were different from rest of the country. And when we say different, it means simple or at par with global standards in terms of legal regulation and tariffs, etc. So, what are special economic zones? Special economic zones are zones which are located within countries' national borders, and their aims include increased trade balance, employment, increased investment, job creation, and effective administration. These special economic zones are created to encourage businesses to set up in the zones. Financial policies are also introduced. And when we talk about the policies which will simplify the entire process, these policies typically encompass investment, taxation, trading, quotas, customs, and labor regulations. Apart from these, in order to attract more companies into these special economic zones, these companies were offered tax holidays, whereupon establishing themselves in a zone, they were granted a period of lower taxation. So, these are the benefits of investment into the special economic zone. Some more benefits of special economic zones are that the procedure were much more simplified in comparison to the rest of country for development, operation and maintenance of special economic zones and setting up of units and conducting business in the area. There is a single window clearance system for setting up an special economic zone or a unit within. At the same time, a company or a developer does not have to take approval from center as well as for state government. They have to take approval from one body only. So there is a single window clearance on matters relating to both central as well as state governments. Apart from this, there was simplified compliance procedures and documentation with emphasis on self certification. So it means that setting up of a unit and running a unit within a special economic zone becomes much more easier in comparison to a regular system of setting up companies in a particular territory. Now, the procedure of setting up these special economic zones was very easy. A developer has to submit a proposal for the establishment of special economic zone to the concerned state government. Now, once the state government has received such a request, they have to forward the proposal with its recommendation within 45 days from the date of receipt of such proposal to the board of approval. The applicant or developer also has the option to submit proposal directly to the board of approval. Now, the board of approval is basically chaired by Secretary, Department of Commerce, and this department has been created by the central government in exercise of powers conferred under the Special Economic Zone Act. All the decisions that are taken by the board of approval are taken through consensus only. So, in this fashion, you can see that the special economic zone were very simple to establish through a single window system and in which there were much more benefits for individual players in terms of companies and industries to set up their operations within the special economic zone. Now, we have talked about how simple or easy it is in order to set up special economic zones. Now, let's try to understand the experience of India in terms of special economic zones. Now, when we talk about special economic zones, in India there are around 355 notified special economic zones, out of which 223 are functional. Now, this has actually attracted investment of around 4.75 lakh crores and this has given employment to around 20 million people. Export worth of around 5.81 lakh crore also takes place from this area and these are the figures of 2018. Now, if we pay attention to the notified area which is around 355 and we talk about the functional area which are around 223, around 133 units of special economic zones in which infrastructure is developed are lying vacant and this is what the point of discussion is. Now, we need to understand that we have talked about special economic zones, but Indian experience of special economic zone is not much healthy or happy in nature. These special economic zones were set up to ensure that manufacturing sector will pick up and this will be a job creator for millions of people in India. At the same time, as already mentioned, that around 5.81 lakh crore of export is done from these areas, but this contribution is primarily from the service oriented sector. It means the intended purpose of giving boost to manufacturing sector has not paid any kind of dividend, especially in the case of special economic zones that we have talked about in India. Now, since service sector requires high level of skill set, such service revolution cannot absorb unskilled or low skilled worker. At the same time, it is important for us to know that China, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, and many other countries in Southeast Asia have developed and built export oriented manufacturing industries, and this has employed millions of people in their territory. Let's take a case of China, in which the manufacturing sector contributes 53% of the GDP. In numbers, these industries employ 22%, and this kind of employment potential is missing in the service sector. Hence, it can be said that special economic zones have not picked up, especially in the manufacturing sector, as was expected from them. Now, in this context, let's try to understand the challenges faced by the special economic zone. Now, when we are talking about the challenges being faced by the special economic zone, there is a strong mention of Baba Kalyani Committee recommendation, which was constituted by Ministry of Commerce and Industry to study the existing special economic zone policy of India. This submitted its report to the government, and the kind of challenges that we have highlighted in our analysis are mentioned in Baba Kalyani Committee report. Now, some of the features which Baba Kalyani Committee recommendation has highlighted is of unutilized land. As already mentioned, around 130 units of special economic zones are lying vacant. And it means that more than 25,000 hectares in special economic zones is not being used properly. Now, the reason for this is there is a lack of flexibility to utilize land in special economic zones for different sectors. Now, Baba Kalyani Committee identified this problem, and they have suggested that strict rules regarding land use should be liberalized. The solution to this challenge, as offered by the committee, is optimal utilization of vacant land in SEZ by allowing flexibility of land use and removing sector specific constraints. Now, here it is important to highlight that special economic zones which are identified in India, these special economic zones were sector specific. The objective was to set up industry of one type in a particular area. This would have enabled economies of scales as well. However, in the case of India, we require more liberal land use policy, and that is what is being suggested in terms of the challenges that is faced by these special economic zones. Second important challenge as identified by the committee is multiple models of economic zones. Now, when you talk about special economic zones, there are multiple models of special economic zones such as SEZ itself, Coastal Economic Zone, Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, National Investment and Manufacturing Zone, Food Park and Textile Park. Now, the presence of these multiple models has led to multiple policies as well, and hence there is a strong recommendation to actually simplify these multiple models. The group of secretaries of various central government departments have recommended rationalization of these models. At the same time, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion and Niti Aayog is going to develop the master plan for the industrial cluster in order to deal with this challenge. So these are the problems which we are trying to find a solution as well. The other important challenge of special economic zone is underutilization of existing capacity. Now, currently in the special economic zone units are not allowed to do job work for the domestic tariff areas or DTA units. Now, when we talk about domestic tariff areas, we have already discussed this in the first slide through a diagram. Domestic tariff areas are areas outside SEZ or any other custom bonded zone in India is known as domestic tariff area. Goods and services going into the SEZ from DTA is treated as exports, and goods coming from the SEZ into DTA is treated as imports. So we have already clarified about this in first slide. Now, when we talk about this underutilization of capacity, it is recommended that optimal utilization of existing capacity in special economic zone units should be done away with, allowing job work for DTA. Now, please try to understand in the earlier version of special economic zones that we have incorporated in India, as we have mentioned, one of the primary incentive of setting up of special economic zone was to earn foreign currency. Now, this limit of job work for domestic tariff area was set up so that foreign currency earning potential of these special economic zones is not compromised in any sense, and that is the reason why this was set up. Next important challenge is domestic sales of SEZ faces a disadvantage as they have to pay full custom duty. Sales from SEZ are considered to be imports and hence taxed accordingly, which makes them uncompetitive. Now, in order to understand the situation in full detail, let's take this box to be country A, and a red box here is the special economic zone within the territory of country A. Now, any kind of movement from special economic zone to this country A will be considered import and the full duty will be charged on this. Now, assume a situation that suppose this country A is India and we are talking about ASEAN as a group. Now, India has a free trade agreement with ASEAN. So, any kinds of good which are coming from ASEAN to India will get tax benefit. At the same time, when goods are coming from a special economic zone to the territory of India, then they will be charged a heavy duty. And this is the problem that we need to solve as well. In this context, it is suggested that best foreign trade agreement rates should be allowed for domestic sales also, which means the sales from special economic zones to the country A as highlighted in the figure. The next important challenge is removal of tax rebates. Now, initially, when special economic zones were set up, there were many tax benefits or SOPs which were being offered. However, things have changed in the recent past. Now, when we talk about minimum alternate tax, which was implemented from 1st of April 2012, as well as imposition of income tax on new SEZs and new units from 1st of April 2017 and 1st of April 2020 respectively. So we can see that the kind of tax benefits these areas were receiving has been withdrawn. And experts are advocating that we should restore income tax benefits as well as MAT exemptions so that these areas can develop fully. Now, in a very brief fashion, let's try to understand why China succeeded but India's special economic zones have limited success so far. Now, there are a few things that we need to understand. The first factor is location itself. Now, when we talk about Chinese special economic zones, they have a geographic advantage with most of the special economic zones are located near ports, unlike the Indian special economic zone areas that are more in the mainland part. Second important thing that has already been mentioned in terms of DTA, that is access to domestic market. Now, when we talk about Chinese special economic zones, these special economic zones were allowed to make sales to the domestic area as well. At the same time, when we talk about India, sales from SEZ are considered imports and hence taxed accordingly, which makes them uncompetitive in nature. Next is when you talk about China, the product from SEZ have access to strong domestic market with very low import duties. This basically fuels the economic growth within the SEZ as well as within the mainland as well. Now, decentralization of power was also better in China, and this has become a major reason for success for SEZ as well. Now, provincial and local authorities were made partners and stakeholders by delegating them powers to approve foreign investment. This process is missing altogether in the case of India. Last important factor is labor policies. The hire and fire policy in the special economic zone has been one of the biggest attraction for foreign investors in China. All jobs are on labor contract basis which stand terminated upon the expiry of the term, which can be fixed, flexible, or for a specific job only. In contrast, when we talk about India, the labor policy in India is worker centric, and hence the investment or the industry's interest is compromised in the special economic zones as well. And these are the reasons why Chinese special economic zones are more successful than the Indian special economic zones. Page number 12 of today's newspaper presents a news which talks about A.R. Rahman's NGO gets FCRA license. By FCRA, we mean Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Now, FCRA has been in news for various reasons, and this topic is important from the perspective of General Studies Paper 2, and it will come under Governance, Constitution, and Polity. At the same time, in order to develop complete grasp on this topic, we need to understand the backdrop of the FCRA Act. But before moving further, let's first understand the news that is there in the newspaper. The Union government has granted Foreign Contribution Regulation Act license to more than 20 NGOs this year, and it includes the A.R. Rahman Foundation as well. The Rahman Foundation had run into trouble with authorities when it allegedly received money from a UK-based mobile phone company in 2015. Now, it is important for us to understand that Foreign Contribution Regulation Act came way back in 1976. This is also the period when India was going through emergency as well. Now, during the period of emergency, the government was very skeptical about the contribution that people or NGOs were receiving from foreign territory. At the same time, when we talk about this particular period, during this period, government of India was more tilted towards former USSR, and hence any kind of contribution which is of foreign and hence any kind of contribution that was of foreign origin or is coming from a developed west was seen with suspicion as well. And this is how the first time in 1976 FCRA Act was passed. The current problem with FCRA is still seen in the same context as well. Now, when we talk about controversy regarding NGOs in India, several foreign funded NGOs were stalling India's economic growth by their obstructionist activism. This is the Intelligence Bureau report which was submitted in 2019. Now, in order to support its claim, the report accused Greenpeace of attempting to destabilize India's energy mix in collusion with US based anti coal lobbying group. Earlier in 2015 as well, the Home Ministry had cancelled FCRA licenses of around 10,000 organizations. So, when we talk about FCRA related problems, these are of recent occurrence. But in order to understand this news in full detail, let's go through the FCRA Act of 1976. Now, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 1976 prohibits any kind of financial contribution from any foreign source or company to a political party registered in India. As already mentioned, this was the period when India was skeptical about the contribution from the developed West. At the same time, they did not want any kind of pressure group which is working against the Indian interest or ideology. So, this provision basically prevented the companies owned by foreign nationals or Indian origin people based abroad with foreign citizenship to fund political parties in India. And this was seen more as a measure to maintain neutrality in the political affairs of the country. However, as things improved and India's approach toward developed West changed significantly, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010 was passed. It basically repealed Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 1976. It gave more authority to enforcement agencies to regulate donations from abroad. The Act went on to explicitly state that this prohibits acceptance and utilization of foreign contribution or foreign hospitality for any activities detrimental to national interest. It also barred several organizations, including those of political nature, from receiving foreign funding. At the same time, there was some relief as well for political parties. Organizations of political nature can accept foreign contribution only upon the prior permission from the Ministry of Home Affairs. So, in this sense, we can see that foreign contribution was accepted, but at the same time, prior permission from Ministry of Home Affairs was mandatory in such cases. For other organizations like NGO, it is mandatory to register under FCRA to receive foreign contribution. So, in a nutshell, foreign contribution was facilitated, at the same time it was highly regulated, and the NGOs have to register themselves in order to receive funds from foreign institutions. However, things changed significantly by a Delhi High Court ruling in 2014. The Delhi High Court in 2014 had directed the Centre and the Election Commission to take appropriate action against the Congress and the BJP, which are political parties, for allegedly accepting foreign funds in violation of the law. Now, once these political parties became implicit in this process, they basically brought the Finance Act of 2016, which changed the definition of foreign company. This was done to facilitate acceptance of foreign funds by these political parties. Now, when we have changed the definition of the company, a firm with less than 50% of share capital held by a foreign entity would no longer be a foreign source anymore. At the same time, the Finance Act of 2016 left room for some categories of foreign funding for political parties. So these are basically done to ensure that political parties keep on getting funds from foreign sources. At the same time, there was close monitoring of NGOs in terms of receiving of funds. In order to remove any kind of problem for these political parties, the amendment came into effect from retrospective perspective from September 2010. However, foreign funds received by political parties before 2010 are open to scrutiny. This was further taken care of by the Finance Bill of 2018. The Finance Bill of 2018 seeks to push this year to 1976, which is the year when the FCRA Act was first implemented in India. This will bring a significant change in terms of foreign funding from the political parties. In effect, the foreign funding from 1976 came out of the purview of the scrutiny of Ministry of Home Affairs. So, in a nutshell, political parties which have received funds from foreign countries have become immune from the regulation of FCRA Act. So we can see that through Finance Act of 2016 and Finance Act of 2018, political parties have made themselves immune to any kind of regulation from FCRA. At the same time, this issue is still important from the perspective of NGOs. Now, NGOs which are having a definite cultural, economic, educational, religious, or social program can receive foreign contribution. But there is a catch. They have to get prior permission for the same. An NGO must be in existence for at least 3 years for registration purpose. All funds received by an NGO must be used only for the purpose for which they are received. Every registered NGO must file an annual report with income and annual expenditure statement, receipt and payment account, and balance sheet for the relevant financial year. All the members and office bearers of an NGO will have to file an affidavit regarding abiding by FCRA provisions as per the foreign contribution regulation rules. So you can see that the kind of regulations that are there for NGOs getting foreign funding is not an easy task. Now this brings us to two important questions. First, should NGOs be accountable? And second, what are the ways to make NGOs accountable? Now, when you talk about NGOs, they work for society and they try to reach out to locations where government machinery or mechanism is limited. So they have a very important role to play. At the same time, they require funds for the same. Now, when you talk about the funds, they draw it from their members, from society, and also from foreign contributions. And they use their resources for the society as such. And hence, these NGOs must be accountable in their operations as well. But at the same time, what are the ways to make them accountable? NGOs which are sponsored by the government or NGOs which acts as arms or agency of the government should be audited, because auditing is something which is a very inherent part for the financial operation of any kind of organization. NGOs work with the government in programs like National Rural Health Mission, Anganwadi, ICDS, etc. Apart from that, self-regulation is also important for the NGOs. So we can say that rather than the government trying to regulate the NGOs from outside, NGOs themselves should take upon themselves to become more transparent and more accountable in its functioning. Page number 15 of today's newspaper carries a news which talks about states to get rupees 19,950 crores GST compensation. Now, the issue of GST is important from the perspective of states, as states are not getting their due share in time. Now, this issue was dealt in detail on 4th of December 2019. You are expected to go back and revise this issue from this video. At the same time, the news that is published today is a very small increment in terms of contribution towards state, which is in tune of 19,950 crores. On the editorial page, there is an article which talks about trump cards, and this basically highlights about trade and agreement between India and the US. The same issue was discussed yesterday by WebObserver in the video dated 20th of February 2020. You must refer to this article, which is more or less same that what has been discussed in the editorial. On the page number 10, there is an editorial which talks about art of life. Now this is related to assisted reproductive technology, which again is discussed by WebObserver in yesterday's video of 20th of February 2020. You are expected to go back and revise the issue from the same video. Now, for the purpose of practice, we have taken questions which are important from the perspective of examination, although there was a fleeting mention of these topics in the newspaper. Now, the first question is, which among the following states are party to Mahadai interstate water dispute? One is Karnataka, second is Goa, third is Tamil Nadu, and fourth is Maharashtra. Now, Supreme Court has recently granted an interim relief to the Karnataka government, allowing it to implement the final order of the Mahadai Water Dispute Tribunal. Now, it is also important here to know that Mahadai River is an interstate river which originates in Belgavi district of Karnataka and flows through Goa. The Karnataka government has plans to construct canals across the Mahadai River to divert its water to another river known as Malprabha in Karnataka. This project is known as Kalasa Banduri project and would be used to meet the drinking water requirement of the district of Dharawad. However, this project has been opposed by both Goa and Maharashtra. So we can see that there is a mention of Karnataka, Goa, and Maharashtra. So in this context, the correct answer is option C, that is 1, 2, and 4 only. Another topic that we have used for reference is GST. Consider the following statements with respect to GST compensation mechanism. First, the GST compensation cess is used to compensate the states for any loss they incur within the first 5 years of GST implementation. This statement is correct. Second, according to GST Act, states are guaranteed compensation if the GST revenues growth is less than 14%. Both the statements are correct and hence the correct answer is option C. At the same time, if you go through the video that we have given in the reference part, this issue is clearly highlighted. This is the reason why we have taken practice questions which are from the previous discussion as well. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. Let's move towards the question of the day. The question of the day reads, consider the following statements about Global Health Security Index. Statement number 1 is, it is an index to test the epidemic nature of various bacteria and viruses. Second statement is, the index is prepared by the WHO. We have to identify which of the statement given are correct. Options are option A, 1 only, option B, 2 only, option C, both 1 and 2, and option D, neither 1 nor 2.